Hi, my name is Chris Brennan, and you're listening to the Auspicious Elections podcast. Today is Monday, October 21st, 2019, starting at 12 p.m. in Denver, Colorado, and this is the 35th episode of the show. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the Auspicious electional charts for November of 2019. Joining me today is Leisa Schaim. Hey, Lisa.
Hey, Chris.
And how's it going?
Good. I'm excited for November.
The last of the Jupiter and Sagittarius elections?
It is. That was my very first line item.
Okay. So, but it's also some of the, I don't know if I want to say best, but yeah, it's getting up there in terms of the best Jupiter elections of the year. There's some really nice ones this month.
Yeah, so there's some nice ones, especially later in the month. It's funny, I think this year of Jupiter Sagittarius, we had really good ones in the beginning and the end of the transit.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So for those who are just joining us, thanks to everyone who signed up, who's new patrons this month. It seems like a lot of people saw the preview video and we're excited about that. So maybe we should introduce how we do this. So in this episode, we're going to outline 4 or 5 different electional charts on different dates throughout the course of November that you can use in order to start or initiate different types of events or undertakings or other ventures using the principles of electional astrology. So these are going to be, we try to shoot for good general purpose charts that could be used for just about anything. Although in some instances, we'll say if certain charts are particularly good for certain types of ventures, or if there's certain activities that you might want to avoid with the same chart.
Yeah.
All right. So let's see, what else? All you have to do is take the date and time that we give you for each of these charts, and then basically calculate the chart and just change the city and set the city for your current location. And when you do that, you should get roughly the same rising sign. And what you want to do is just adjust the chart until you get the same exact rising degree of the zodiac that we have in the example chart. So I noticed that some people still get confused and they try to convert time zones and stuff like that, but that's really not necessary for using these charts because we set them for local time, which means that you just want to set it so that you get about the same rising sign and the same rising degree, which should be roughly what we give you in the example, but just set for your city.
Exactly. And you do want to double check because things can shift a little bit depending on how far you are from, where we start, which is Denver, Colorado. So if you have astrology software, that's great. Cast it in that. If you don't, you can still do that for free in astro.com. That's a reliable source to give you accurate charts. So just do double check with the information and your city to make sure both that it is the same rising sign, because occasionally we'll put the chart towards the beginning or towards the end of a rising sign. And so you do want to make sure it hasn't switched. And if so, just adjust it a little bit time-wise and so that it's the same rising sign that we're talking about. And then occasionally you'll also find that we'll sometimes say, make sure that this, moon applying aspect hasn't passed in your location, that kind of thing. Or we'll say if it has passed in your location, use the same time the day before. So those are just some general things to watch out for.
Right. So sometimes if you're in a time zone that's particularly far east of us, you might have to back the chart up by a day in order to get the moon in roughly the same position or applying to the same planets. But otherwise, you always want to use roughly the same time that we give in the chart and just adjust it until you get about the same rising sign and the same rising degree, because that's what's most important. All right, so let's jump into the charts or do we have any review? I think usually we do some review at the beginning to talk about things we learned from the last month of doing elections. I know I had some stuff. Does anything jump out to you that you had in mind?
I didn't have a lot of specifics. The one general thing to recap, which we were looking forward to the month before, was just that it was really nice to be able to use Sagittarius rising charts again after Mars left Virgo, because Mars left Virgo early in the month, last month in October, and this month as we're recording it, but early October. And so then we could use Sagittarius rising again, whereas for a while, Mars was doing an overcoming square from Virgo. And so it was kind of messing up the ability to use Sagittarius rising.
Yeah. So there's backing up to September, and we had that square at 16 degrees Virgo to 16 Sag of Mars to Jupiter. But even for most of the rest of the next few weeks, Mars is still moving through Virgo and overcoming Jupiter by sign.
Yeah, and so after that, then Sagittarius rising was great again, which has been nice to be able to use. I haven't used it for anything like monumental, but I've just noticed it's, fine again. You can use it and it's like a solid, good rising sign because Jupiter's in a day chart in its own sign in the first house and free from malefics.
Yeah, definitely. Were there any specific instances of things? Like I feel like there was something that I had, but I can't remember what it was at this point in
Mhm.
terms of like an election that really made sense, either
Yeah.
for good or for ill.
Yeah, I don't know what you might be thinking of. Yeah, for me, it was just that I got to use Sag rising and Pisces rising again. And again, as we were looking forward to last month, both of those now are day chart Jupiters. And
Right.
so fully benefic Jupiter.
No, I just remembered what it was.
Oh,
So we're still dealing with like the noise issues at our house,
oh,
which
right.
famously started right in the middle of that forecast episode a couple of months back, right when Mars like hit the midheaven
Mm-hmm.
while Austin and Kelly and I were recording. And at that time, suddenly we started hearing like loud drilling and hammering like right outside my window,
Yeah.
which nearly, Steven edited a bunch of it out, but it nearly ruined the rest of the episode. It did ruin the rest of our sleep for like the next month or something as they've been
Month and a
doing that.
half. Yeah, it was awful.
But then there was this funny Mars thing that happened just like 2 or 3 weeks ago. It was like 2 weeks ago now, where we usually get the weekends off, and like Saturday and Sunday they stop doing the construction.
Right.
But
Oh, yeah.
I
Oh,
woke up at
yeah.
like 6 o'clock in the morning to like loud stomping like over my bedroom
Uh-huh.
from above, from like the what turns out to be like the 4-year-old above, like woke up at 6 in the morning and decided
Mm-hmm.
to like start having a parade in his
Uh-huh.
bedroom at like 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And it really sucked because I woke up to that after like a week of not sleeping, and I was going to catch up.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I was like lying there for like 30 minutes, and it just like kept going on, and I didn't know what to do. And
Mm-hmm.
eventually like I got so annoyed and angry that I like used a broom to like tap on the ceiling to like say like pipe down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but what was funny is at that very moment, about 5 minutes later, I decided to look at the chart, and I saw that Mars was actually exactly on the ascendant at the moment that I basically freaked out and started banging on the ceiling.
Right.
Do you remember? And the moon was like opposing it or something? Do you remember what day that was?
Oh, it was the day of our meeting. So was the second Saturday, whatever date that was.
Oh yeah, that was it, because we had like a full
Yeah.
day like of stuff to do that
Yeah,
day,
we
and I had to
were.
organize a meeting.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, there's the Saturday.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. It's funny because we were talking about, sometimes we bring up things like this. Not that they're specifically electional moments. We're not choosing something, but you can really often learn in reverse, from the chart of the moment, and that's why we sometimes bring up what happened during the chart of the moment, because those are things to either use or avoid when you're more deliberately casting charts for like electional purposes.
Yeah, this was the chart. So
Oh yeah.
he actually started before 6 o'clock in the morning. He started like pounding and like jumping on the ceiling at 5 something in the morning.
Uh-huh.
And he probably started just after, I realized in retrospect, like right after the ascendant moved into Libra,
Hmm.
where Mars was, he started like doing this.
Right.
And so the ascendant was at 0 degrees of Libra, Mars is at 5 degrees of Libra, the sun is at 18 Libra, so this is before sunrise, and the moon was at 3 degrees of Aries, applying to an opposition with Mars.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that was what was like compounding the whole situation.
Yeah.
And so I'm like lying there for like 30 40 minutes, like hearing this. And then eventually, um, it looks like at about 6:04 in the morning is when I then freaked out and like hit the ceiling with the broom, asking him to pipe down,
Mm.
and realized like maybe 5 minutes later at like 6:10, I glanced at the chart and saw the ascendant was at 6 degrees of Aries.
Hmm.
And so 5 minutes earlier, the ascendant would have been exactly conjunct Mars.
Right.
So I use it as an example only because, yeah, you can really learn things and see how certain planetary alignments in different parts of the chart and different angles and stuff like that manifest if you're paying attention to it on a regular basis,
Hmm.
either by pulling up Solar Fire and having the animate chart feature going sort of in the background while you're doing day-to-day stuff, or, like we do, having Astrogold installed on our phones and
Right.
just pulling it up and being able to see again the chart of the moment like really quickly there.
Right. Yeah, that one's actually funny. I'm noticing as you've pulled up too, because not only is Mars crossing the ascendant there, but since it was still a night chart when Libra started rising, that meant that that had that Saturn in a night chart in the fourth, which is like our home.
Yeah.
And our home was unpleasant at that moment.
Right. Which then later like hit the IC,
Yeah.
and I ended up like having to go up there to like try to talk to them.
Yeah.
And that didn't work out very well initially. So I was just kind of like awake and annoyed for the rest of the morning
Mm-hmm.
and sort of like wrecked.
Yeah.
All right. So that was like my one really striking like inceptional / electional observation was Mars like hitting the ascendant.
Mm-hmm. And that's always, I mean, that's usually striking when Mars hits angles, I find.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Did you have anything else?
No, not for review.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's transition then to talking about the overview of November and what some of the general things are we need to be aware of for the electional weather for November.
Mm-hmm. So, as we mentioned first off, this is going to be the last month that Jupiter is in Sagittarius for the year. So we really want to capitalize on Jupiter in Sagittarius elections, if at all possible. It does ingress into Capricorn on December 2nd. So, just a couple of days after the month's over. Most of the month, in a really happy coincidence, Venus will also be in Sagittarius from November 1st through 25th. So it's going to be co-present with Jupiter and applying to a conjunction with Jupiter most of the month. So that's really nice as well, that doubling up.
Yeah, definitely. It puts a nice concentration on both the benefics and that sign and the mutable angles. And also both of them are not having hard aspects from the malefics pretty much the entire month.
Exactly. So we really want to concentrate on the mutable signs, and particularly Sagittarius or Pisces, which Jupiter rules. In terms of, I was going to say this in a bit, but in terms of Venus ruling things, normally you'd want to try to use Venus ruled things as well, because, for instance, like Libra rising or Taurus rising, since Venus is applying to Jupiter most of the month, but you can't really. This month, Libra rising will put Saturn in a night chart in the fourth, so that's just out. Taurus rising puts Venus and Jupiter in the eighth, so I really would only use it if it's a very specific eighth house purpose, like applying for grants or scholarships or things like that, something where you're trying to, do something beneficial regarding other people's money, basically. So that's that. Mercury is going to be retrograde most of the month. It retrogrades just before the month starts, and then will station direct November 20th. So that's a little too bad. It's not ideal to have Mercury retrograde, but it's also not a deal breaker either necessarily. What I normally do with elections with regard to that is just try to avoid Mercury ruling the ascendant for sure, because then that makes it a lot more focal. I do try to avoid it most of the time ruling the moon if Mercury is still retrograde, because the moon is another crucial piece of electional astrology. And then just watch out for what house the topic that you're trying to do elections for pertains to the most. And I would ideally not have Mercury ruling that as well.
Sure. And we noticed when we were doing the forecast episode this month that Mars changes signs right about the same time that Mercury stations direct.
Yeah, Mars ingresses into Scorpio November 19th. So then it is in its own sign, making it a little bit more effective as a Mars. And then it does free up, Capricorn rising, because Mars is no longer in the 10th.
Yeah, so Mars is no longer overcoming Saturn by sign.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you can almost use Mars, but it's a little tricky because Mars is applying to that opposition with Uranus.
Yeah, exactly.
Really closely.
Indeed. Other than that, Neptune stations, in terms of any other stations, Neptune stations direct November 26th. So that'll be in the mix if we're focusing on Sagittarius and Pisces. And then just an interesting thing I noticed in terms of the difference between Pisces rising and Sagittarius rising, they are both day charts now, which is really nice. So Jupiter is fully benefic, ruling the ascendant either way. I did notice, though, even though Neptune is in Pisces, And so if you do a Pisces rising, it's in the first house. So, it does add a little bit of that like diffusion or potential, a bit of confusion or something like that to Pisces rising elections. It's still a much stronger sign for career matters right now than Sagittarius rising, because Pisces rising is going to put both Venus and Jupiter in the 10th, which is really nice for a career, versus Sagittarius rising is going to have that Mercury retrograde in the 12th house ruling the 10th.
Right.
So if you're choosing between the two and you're doing anything having to do with career, I would definitely go with Pisces rising. And conversely, Sagittarius rising if you're having to do anything with like home or family related matters, because then Jupiter is ruling the 4th.
Sure. And then there might be some adjustment also depending on if, let's say, like financial matters are important to you, if like the second house needs to be good.
Yeah, definitely.
Or if other houses in the chart need to be good and what relationship you want them to have.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, I was just mentioning those two because they're going to be the strongest rising signs this month. And so, yeah, those are some of the differences between the two.
Yeah, and since this is the last of Jupiter and Sag, and Venus is also there at the same time, it's pretty much largely going to be Sag and Pisces rising electional charts this month.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so that's pretty much the overview.
Okay.
You want to start with the first chart?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay. So the first chart of the month is going to be about a week in on November 7th. And that's going to be around 8:31 a.m.
Are you saying my birthday is not a good electional chart this year?
I heard you mention that it might not be.
Okay.
Yeah.
So November 7th.
Yeah. So November 7th, around 8:31 a.m. And that's going to put about 7 degrees of Sagittarius rising on the ascendant. So this has both Venus and Jupiter in Sagittarius in the first house. You have both benefic planets in the first house with Jupiter ruling it in a day chart, which is really positive. Jupiter is ruling the first and the fourth houses. The moon is in Pisces in the fourth house, and it's applying first to a trine with Mercury, and then a square with Jupiter, and it does have reception with Jupiter since Jupiter does rule the moon in Pisces, so it makes that even more positive of a connection. The specific time on that one was chosen to mitigate Mercury being the ruler of the MC by placing it sextile the midheaven, which also happens to place Jupiter square the midheaven. And in this location, it might not be the same where you are. In this location, that also happens to place Venus right on the ascendant.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that means in this chart, they don't need to worry necessarily about the degree of the ascendant. They just need to make sure the ascendant is somewhere in Sagittarius, and then they need to try to adjust the midheaven if they can in their location to get it closely sextile to Mercury.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was the exact time there. This is kind of a fourth house focused election in some ways, since Jupiter is not only ruling the fourth as well as the first, placed in the first house, bringing fourth house matters to the forefront, but the moon's also in the fourth as well.
Okay.
As far as you will notice, if you watch Mars, the progression of Mars here, Mars is actually fairly closely sextile already to Jupiter. So the condition of Mars is being improved a bit by applying closely to Jupiter. So any Mars ruled things, like what would that be here? The fifth house. So anything with children or romance, that would be improved over what it would be otherwise. Yeah.
And it even might take some of the edge off of its 11th house. Otherwise, problematic placement in creating discord with friends or groups, because Mars is applying to that sextile with Jupiter within 3 degrees in a day chart.
Yeah, exactly. So, in terms of financial things, Saturn's in the second in Capricorn in its own sign. It's direct, but it does have that overcoming square from Mars. So it's not fully good, but like maybe passable.
For financial matters?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's actually better for more shared finances with the moon ruling the 8th house and applying to Jupiter.
Right.
Yeah, than personal finances.
So other people's money. If you had to take a trip or use this for a 9th house election, you might want to mitigate the sun as the ruler of the 9th instead of Mercury.
Yeah, exactly.
So just back up the midheaven and place it at about 14 Virgo. if you can, and get it into a close aspect with the sun to help it out of its 12th house position.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Anything else about this chart?
Anything else?
Mercury's retrograde, of course.
Yeah.
So that's going to be true for the entire first half or 3 weeks, 3 weeks of the month.
3 weeks of the month, yeah.
Can't really avoid this. This is in the first half of the retrograde cycle. So this is definitely the more challenging half of the retrograde cycle compared to later once the conjunction with the sun, the retrograde conjunction with the sun takes place and things start to clear up a bit.
Yeah.
So that's one consideration in terms of using this election versus one later in the month.
Yeah, that's true. Looking at Venus, I mean, Venus is ruling the 11th and the 6th. So that is another factor helping out things involving friends and groups, even though Mars is there. Mars has got both, the application to Jupiter as well as its ruler, Venus, is in the first and then applying to Jupiter.
So there may be problems with 11th house things related to friends and groups, but some of it might be manageable.
Exactly. And in terms of health things, this might be a decent chart, although there's some unpredictability potential with Uranus in the 6th. But, the first house is a major, body and mind house, and both benefics are there. And then Venus is additionally ruling the 6th. So it could be decent for health matters as well, or appearance for sure.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move on to the next chart.
Okay. So there is a rising sign variation for this one, which is sort of technically the next chart. Just later in the day, 2:29 p.m., which is going to put 20 degrees of Pisces rising here. And so this is one where there's definitely an alternate rising sign variation. So Jupiter is ruling the ascendant and placed in the 10th, as we were talking about, along with Venus. Here, the moon is in the first house, and it's applying very closely to a trine with Mercury in the 9th, and then a square to Jupiter in the 10th. And I did notice that the Sun-Saturn sextile is quite close at this point. And that's kind of nice. Any of these sort of stability-enhancing pieces that I noticed in a few of the charts this month are helpful because even though Sagittarius is in really good condition with Venus and Jupiter there, and so is Pisces, therefore, they're still mutable signs. And so that does lend itself more towards like changeability rather than like solidity. And so like any additional factors in any of these charts that move towards stability, I think are really positive to help kind of like stabilize the election for the long term if you're trying to do a long-term thing.
Yeah, definitely. And it helps also balance out, otherwise making Neptune prominent by putting it up conjunct the ascendant.
Exactly. So, Sun, Saturn applying sextile. And it's also just a sextile, so it's like stability without being oppressive, which is kind of nice, I think. This one, the exact time was putting Jupiter on the midheaven here, which also happens to place Mars in the 8th, approximately sextile the midheaven, so mitigating its 8th house placement. So you can experiment with the exact time in your location to get the midheaven around 24, somewhere between 22 and 24 degrees of Sagittarius, if you can.
Okay, so just pick anywhere in Pisces rising and try to put Jupiter on the degree of the MC.
Yeah, exactly. And you'll notice also, in addition to, this being a better 10th house election compared to the Sagittarius rising for a while here, that it also pulls the sun and Mercury out of the 12th house, which is somewhat nice. I mean, the sun is the sect-light during the day. So even though I don't like rule out elections that put the sun in the 12th, I think it's kind of more ideal if it's somewhere else.
Right.
Yeah. So in these Pisces rising ones, they're going to be in the 9th instead of the 12th.
Yeah, pretty much everything in this chart is in good houses except for Mars.
Yeah. So that's the other rising sign variation. You can decide based on the topic of your election or, other factors like that.
Yeah, and even though Mars is ruling the 2nd of finances and the 9th of travel, and it's placed in the 8th of shared resources and other people's money and mortality, which is not great. It is applying to that sextile with Jupiter, so there's some positive mitigation, even though if it's not otherwise a great chart for financial matters. Yeah,
I thought that was really nice about the beginning of November, that Mars is getting mitigated like that.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So here Saturn is in the 11th, so, maybe some short-term difficulties with friends and groups, but better than Mars there, although it is still getting the overcoming square from Mars then instead of Mars in the 11th.
Right.
So mixed bag for 11th house matters.
Okay.
Yep. All right, so that's that one.
So is that chart 2 or is that just variation?
I guess it's
1?
variation number 1.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the next chart?
So November 11th, a few days later, it's going to be at around 1:52 p.m., which is going to put about 11 degrees of Pisces rising on the ascendant. Lots of Pisces and Sag rising this month. So Jupiter and Venus in the 10th house in Sagittarius. Again, Mars in the 8th in Libra, applying really closely now to a sextile with Jupiter. It's like close to exact here. So improving Mars again. The moon is exalted in this chart in Taurus and in the 3rd house. It's first applying to a sextile with Neptune, and then it's going to apply to a trine with Saturn and Capricorn in the 11th. So this one was kind of thrown in because, in addition to the general Venus, we would just want to capitalize on all the Venus-Jupiter applying conjunction charts this month. It is, again, like I was saying with the Sun-Saturn sextile in the last chart, a nice stability one. This actually has more stability factor in it than I would say most of the month with the, fixed sign of Taurus applying to a trine with Saturn in a day chart.
Right.
Yeah. So I really liked that piece of this election. It also happens to be the day of the Sun-Mercury Cazimi in Scorpio in the 9th there.
Okay, so this is after the conjunction. So this is in the second half of the Mercury retrograde cycle where things that were generally messed up during the first half of the Mercury retrograde when it was stationing generally start to see some resolution of that and things like coming back together again. Mm-hmm. It's not completely out of the woods, but you're sort of getting there, or the turning point takes place where you start heading towards the exit at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, the exact time here was chosen to mitigate the moon being in the cadent 3rd house. So try to get around 11 degrees or so of Pisces rising if you can in your location. That does place moon sextile ascendant, making it a little more prominent than its otherwise 3rd house location. That also happens to then simultaneously place Venus square the ascendant, since Venus is at 12.5. So that's kind of nice that you get both of those at once. And it kind of puts a bit of focus on third house matters if you happen to need to do a 3rd house thing, like communication, like reading, or not reading really, but like writing or teaching or something education related or anything having to do with siblings. Even though Uranus is there, again, that is a little bit of a wild card piece. But otherwise, it's both the moon exalted in Taurus in the 3rd as well as the ruler of the 3rd, Venus, up there in the 10th, applying to conjunction with Jupiter and square the ascendant. So it has some 3rd house focus here.
Okay.
Yeah, so particularly good for that, even though you can, of course, use it for lots of other things.
Right.
Yeah. And career matters, of course, goes without saying with any of these Pisces rising elections from here on forward.
And this is the very last of Mars applying to Jupiter?
Yes, it is. So after that, it won't be mitigated anymore.
So Mars is at 2506 Libra in this chart, and it's applying to Jupiter at 2530 Sag?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And you find with, the mutable placements, not only changeability, but also like, with the Sagittarius placements in particular there this month, there's excitement, but, the moon in Taurus is like, okay, let's fix that excitement for the long haul. So a lot of the other ones don't have that.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. I think that's about it on this one. Mars is again ruling the 2nd. Pretty mitigated with that almost exact sextile to Jupiter, but it's still Mars ruling the 2nd in the 8th house. So financial matters could still be, I think all these charts, honestly, with Pisces rising and Sagittarius rising, you either get Saturn in the 2nd or Mars ruling the 2nd. Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, I think that's all I have on this one.
Okay. What's the next chart?
So the next one, we're going to skip ahead about a week, a little over a week. Now this one chronologically, I'm just going to mention here because it's in order chronologically, but this is the one that I wasn't fully sure about including. And I'm just going to say that up front. So the last 3 charts of the month after this one, I think are better. So use those if you can. This is just another, this is the last bit of being able to use this Jupiter in Sagittarius. So, we can talk through whether you want to recommend this one. But anyway, November 19th, around 7:10 a.m. And that's right after Sagittarius starts rising. So basically the very beginning of Sagittarius rising. There are some pieces that are totally fine about the chart. There was just really one factor. So, yes.
Yeah, you're kind of scaring me.
No, I'm sorry. I mean, I'm probably overstating it, but it's just that the other three after this are like more solidly, definitely good.
All right.
So anyway, this has Venus and Jupiter. You can see, towards the end, as we get to the latter part of November here, Venus and Jupiter are just so close to their exact conjunction, and this is right before Jupiter leaves Sagittarius. So I'm just like, use all the Sagittarius, use all the Jupiter elections,
Yeah, seems fine.
Okay. Well, with this one, I would say, the great things about it are Venus and Jupiter in the first, getting close in aspect to the exact conjunction. And then the moon is in Leo in the ninth house. And it's applying, it actually looks like it's applying to a square with the sun first in the 12th, but it's not because the sun is moving faster. So it'll actually trine Jupiter next, which is really nice because then it's not just trine Jupiter, but it's enclosed by the benefics, meaning it's separating. Its last aspect was the moon trine to Venus, so it's separating from that and applying to a trine with Jupiter. So in between the aspects to the benefics and actually applying to the one that's better during that sect, which is the daytime sect. So Jupiter is more benefic. So that part is great. I really like that part.
Mm-hmm.
Really, my only concerns about including it were now there's 3 planets in the 12th, and the moon is technically square to Mars by sign, even though it's widely separating. So just that combination of both of those. I don't really like to overload the 12th house, and I normally don't put even a sign-based moon square Mars. But like I said, it's obviously widely separating and in great condition between Venus and Jupiter.
Right. Yeah, I think it's fine. And you chose the really early ascendant in our location to try to mitigate Mercury by putting the midheaven at 14, sextile Mercury at 11.
Exactly. So you can see what the midheaven is doing in your location. That's obviously like you have to be ready to go like as soon as Sagittarius starts rising here in order to get that mitigation of Mercury. Other things you could do would be mitigate the sun a little bit later with a later Virgo midheaven if you were doing a ninth house thing. And of course, the moon is in the ninth, so it might be nice for a ninth house focus thing, like travel or education or so forth. But you would then want to mitigate the sun more. You could also choose to put Venus or Jupiter on the ascendant.
Yeah, I suspect for some people they're not going to have a choice just because it's so close. After even here, the ascendant moves into Sagittarius. You can only barely get the midheaven sextile to Mercury.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was like almost not possible. It was already separating by a few degrees.
So if you can't, just don't worry about it. Put the midheaven sextile to the sun from 26 Virgo to 26 Scorpio, or even if you can't get that, just put the benefics closer to the ascendant if you need to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I always like putting the benefics on the ascendant. It just matters, what kind of house topic you're using the election for and whether, Mars, Mercury, or the sun in this case rules any of those houses.
Well, and then here in our location, there's an interesting question. If you put the benefics on the ascendant, let's say put the ascendant at 24 Sag, where Venus is at 22 Sag on one side and Jupiter is at 27 Sag on the other side, the midheaven at that point here in Denver is at 16 Libra, so it's square to Saturn,
right?
Although it's in a day chart and Saturn's in the second house. And so there's a real question about, would that be worth it for the sake of mitigating Saturn? Although I guess if you wanted to mitigate Saturn, it would be better to get the trine.
Yeah.
Is it worth it in order to mitigate Saturn in its second house position, or is that kind of not a great signature to put in the chart of Saturn square the midheaven, even if it's a day chart?
Yeah, I normally don't like putting Saturn square the midheaven unless it's unavoidable.
Yeah, I guess it really just depends on how important second house matters are to you.
And whether you can get the midheaven trine Saturn alternately or not.
Yeah, like if we back it all the way up here to early Sag rising and put the midheaven at 16, then it's trining Saturn at 16 Capricorn.
Yeah, I would like that better.
Preferable?
Yeah.
Okay.
Although it does then make Neptune very angular right on the IC.
That's true.
It's hard, you can't often. This is the kind of thing where if people see electional charts and then immediately start critiquing it, because there's always something that's unideal, even in great charts.
Yeah.
So you can kind of see that in motion here as we're messing with the angles as to like, you can't get, one thing in a better place in regards to the angles without doing something that you don't like,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Anything else about this chart?
No, I think that's about it. I feel like we should be shooting confetti at this point for the last bit of the year-long Jupiter and Sagittarius, because I'm just like, here. There's 4 charts in a row at the end.
Right.
Use all of the Jupiter.
And you get a Jupiter and Sagittarius.
Yeah, it feels like that, the Oprah thing.
You get one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got 4 in a row in very close proximity here. It's like confetti.
All right. Well, what's the next one?
So, and just for some places, if you just switch to Pisces rising a few hours later, around 1:50 p.m., some places will still have the moon applying trine to Jupiter. And if you do, that's another thing you can consider, although it goes exact pretty quickly here. It's around 1:50 p.m. here, which would be 23 degrees of Pisces rising, which would get both the moon still applying to Jupiter by trine, as well as mitigating the moon in the 6th house at this point by trine the midheaven. But yeah, in some places it will have already gone exact before Pisces rising, and in some places it will still be applying.
Yeah, and then what is it applying to after that?
Square to the sun immediately after, because they're almost at the same degrees at this point. It's 27:11, 27:13.
Yeah, and then that'll separate pretty quickly though. So then the next aspect must be sextile with Mars.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that would be fine, but you obviously want to use it if it's applying to Jupiter more.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's just another rising sign variation for some locations.
So just anywhere in Pisces rising, and really anywhere, put the midheaven anywhere as well, although maybe trining the moon would be nice.
Trining the moon would be nice if you can get it while still applying, since it's in the 6th Caden house.
You could also just mitigate Mercury and put the ascendant at 11 Pisces, trine to Mercury.
That's true.
Which will help strengthen that placement a little bit.
Yeah, if you need, particularly if it involves another party, since it rules the 7th house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So then after that, 2 days later, this will be the last 3 of the month, and these are really nice. I like these a lot. So November 21st is the next one. Around 1:38 p.m., which is about 21 degrees of Pisces rising. And so, again, this is going to be Jupiter and Venus in Sagittarius in the 10th house. Great for career matters. You can see that Venus is only about 3 degrees now, applying conjunction with Jupiter. So that's really nice. The moon is in the 7th house in Virgo, and it's applying, to a square with Jupiter, and is also enclosed by the benefics this time, although that may vary a little bit in your location. If it's a little bit before, if it's at 23 Virgo where you are, that's fine. It's applying to both benefics. That's still great. Yeah. So in this location, it happens to be in between aspects with Venus and Jupiter. And the moon is now ruled by a Mercury that is direct, which is great. You can see Mercury is there at 11, Scorpio in the 9th house, although it's still slow from stationing. It just stationed the day before, around 19th, 20th of November. So it's still a slow Mercury, but at least it's direct now. And so that's ruling the moon. There was another possible election mid-month that I didn't use because I think the moon was in Gemini and Mercury was still retrograde, and I just didn't love it ruling the moon.
Okay.
So here it's direct now, as well as by sign it has reception as well.
With Mars?
With Mercury, the moon and Mercury.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, even though it's by degree it's separating, but at least it's ruled by Mercury and in an aspect to Mercury by sign.
So this is another one where it's, again, any degree of Pisces rising, and then just put the benefics in the midheaven if you can. Or alternatively, you could have the degree of the ascendant trine Mercury at 11 if you want to strengthen Mercury again. That would be fine because then the benefics are still really angular coming up in the midheaven.
Yeah.
And in the 10th whole sign house.
Yeah.
These are all basically like the elections that we're going to be using for recording podcast episodes with
Right.
Austin and Kelly the week that they're here.
Yeah.
Because they're getting in on like Tuesday, right as Mercury's stationing direct, and that's going to be one of the elections.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got to record a podcast episode, yearly forecast.
Yeah.
It's going to be a long week.
Yeah. There's something nice about, you'll notice that Mars is now moved into Scorpio, which means it's no longer doing that overcoming square to Saturn. And so even though Saturn is in the 11th house, it's a day chart, it's in its own sign of Capricorn, is direct, it has all those good things going for it, and now it's free from the sign-based square from Mars in Libra. So it does make 11th house matters better, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, so friends and groups and things. It's still Saturn, so it's going to have a more serious vibe if you're doing it for friends and groups using this election, but it'll still be more positive than it would have been with the overcoming square from Mars.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the only downsides of this sort of stretch or this week of the best elections of the month in the third week of November is just that applying Mars-Uranus opposition.
I know. I wish we could get that out of the way because that is definitely the downside.
It's just a little explosive, a little, what are some of the other terms?
Yeah, like sudden, unexpected things happening that might be volatile or might be...
Volatile, that's the word.
Yeah, volatile, sudden conflict, things like that.
So like it's taken out of, it's not in a prominent axis so that it's like depicting or stamping the entire chart with that nature, but it certainly is putting that on a certain axis somewhere in the chart in the third and ninth houses here.
Right. Yeah. So things.
And Mars is ruling the second and the ninth, so it might especially be tied into those two areas or those two topics.
Right. So financial matters, your own personal finances, or travel or education type of things.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that is too bad about it because the rest of the chart's just like great.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So 2 days later is the next chart, November 23rd. And I believe this is the featured election for the month. So it's around 1:24 p.m., which puts about 19 degrees of Pisces rising on the ascendant. Jupiter is in the 10th. Venus-Jupiter conjunction is almost exact here, which is really nice in the 10th whole sign house, having to do with career or your public roles or that sort of thing. The sun's also in Sagittarius now in the 10th house. So it's a really 10th house focused election with those three there, I would say.
Yeah, I like that. That is a little bit of an improvement of the previous one where the sun was still in Scorpio.
Yeah, I think so too. And then, of course, Jupiter is then ruling the sun. So that's nice. Let's see what else. The moon is in Libra in the 8th house, and it's applying within a few degrees to a sextile with Venus with reception, since Venus rules the Libra moon. It'll be applying to both Venus and Jupiter. So depending on where you are, if it's slightly past or in between, that's fine too. Let's see what else. The moon is mitigated here. The midheaven is around 24 degrees of Sagittarius. That's kind of what you want to shoot for. So any degree of Pisces rising, just move the midheaven to around 24 degrees of Sagittarius, and then you'll mitigate that moon in the 8th house.
Okay. Austin was noting that the moon here is conjunct the fixed star Spica.
Oh, that's nice too.
Yeah.
Let's see what else. I don't know. I really like this election, although you can see that the Mars-Uranus is even closer now. It's only about a half a degree off.
Yeah, it is even tighter. But nonetheless, this was one of the best charts that we found for the entire year, and it was the one we picked out for the best chart of November, both in our yearly Auspicious elections report that we released last December for sale as a separate thing, as well as in the monthly forecast this month. This is the one we highlighted.
Yeah, I really like it. I love those 3 planets in Sagittarius in the 10th, and that Jupiter is ruling the ascendant. That moon is applying to all of that. Yeah, it's really nice. And in terms of the feel of it, I mean, not just the condition of the sun being ruled by Jupiter instead of Mars in a day chart, and the 3 planets really prominently placed in the 10th like that, but just the feel of it as well, the sun in Sagittarius versus Scorpio. This has a much more, I think, upbeat, buoyant feel compared to the last one.
Yeah. So it's like the best time for this is right here. So in your location, you just want to pick anywhere with the ascendant in Pisces, and then just try to put the midheaven around 24 Sag if you can. So it's sextile the sun or sextile the moon at 24 Libra in the 8th. Even if you can't, the fact that the moon is in Libra at 24 degrees and applying within a few degrees to a sextile with Venus with reception is already mitigating the moon. So even if you can't mitigate the moon with the midheaven, that's not necessarily a deal breaker or a big deal here because it already has mitigation by applying to an angular planet.
Yeah.
And one thing with Pisces rising charts you have to be careful about is Pisces moves really fast. So that's a little bit of a thing you have to be careful about if you set the ascendant in the middle part of Pisces, is that you won't have that long until it switches. So if the ascendant was at 15 Pisces, let's say, that's at 115 here. And then already it pretty quickly zooms through the rest of Pisces and it moves into Aries by 150.
Yeah.
That's only like 30 or 40 minutes later.
Yeah, it's quick. I'm glad you mentioned that because, yes, Pisces rising, you really got to keep an eye on it.
Yeah, so that applies to all of these charts. And this is the chart that we're going to use to record the year ahead forecast episode for 2020 with Austin and Kelly this day. And initially I was thinking we would start right then, but I'm almost wondering if maybe we'll just start with earlier in Pisces rising so we can have that entire rising sign happening for the whole beginning part of the episode.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can do that. I mean, the moon, like you said, is still mitigated by applying to Venus and Jupiter in the 10th as it is. Then you make the sun more angular. If you start with early Pisces rising, the sun will be square the ascendant as well as in the 10th. So,
right.
Yeah.
Or I could do 12 Pisces rising at 108 in order to get the ascendant trine Mercury.
Yeah, that is another option.
Yeah. All right. I think that's actually going to be it. I think I'm going to use around there.
Yeah.
Because then the midheaven by then is already at 20. So it's already applying, moving towards within 3 or 4 degrees, the moon at 24.
Yeah, that's a nice one to do. And especially anything, I mean, this is more of a group thing rather than a purely one-on-one, but it does rule the 7th in terms of, interactions.
Right.
So yeah. Yeah, so I really like this chart. It's a really positive chart.
Okay. What's the next chart?
So the next and last chart is going to be November 27th, 4 days later, right around the same time, around 1:20 p.m. with 24 Pisces rising. Although, of course, as we've just been discussing, you can play with the ascendant, particularly since Pisces rises quickly. So Jupiter in Sagittarius in the 10th. This is just after the new moon in Sagittarius.
What time again?
Sorry, around 1:20 p.m.
Okay.
Yeah. So, although that's changeable. But so this is right after the new moon in Sagittarius. So that's kind of nice in that you do have a waxing moon. The waning moon is never a deal breaker for me, but it's like an additional benefit if it's waxing, I would say, in terms of building most things. So you have the sun, moon, and Jupiter in Sagittarius in the 10th house. You have the moon applying to a conjunction with Jupiter and ruled by Jupiter. And I think this is actually funny that this is the last Jupiter in Sagittarius election, because this is almost like the perfect looking last hurrah kind of chart for Jupiter in Sagittarius, because it'll leave less than a week later for Capricorn. And so just to have the sun, moon, Jupiter, with the moon applying to conjunction with Jupiter in the 10th just feels like one last Jupiter hurrah.
Yeah, one last lunation. It's too bad we've lost Venus, and Venus has already gone to the dark side into
Right.
Capricorn.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing about this chart is that Neptune is stationary. It's technically stationed the day before, I think, but it takes so long to move that it's basically stationary. And so that does, by using Pisces rising, it does put it in the first house. So it makes it kind of more prominent Neptune that's stationary. So I would say just to be aware of that, it might not be the best one to use if you need exact precision in what you're doing. I would use maybe one of the other ones.
Yeah, and it looks like the sun is starting to move into a square, degree-based square with Neptune ruling the 6th house. So it could be people that work for you and some nebulousness surrounding that.
Yeah.
Some sort of connection between the 6th house and the 1st house.
Yes. And in addition to that, I would say just in general, since it's in the first, that it's ideal. In addition to maybe prioritizing another chart if you need like a precision, detail-oriented election, this one also in a more positive sense might be good to use if you know that you need, with such a 10th house focus, if you're trying to put yourself out there in some way that doesn't require details initially, it can lend, in a positive sense. We're usually talking about Neptune somewhat negatively, but in a positive sense, it can lend a sort of positive glamour, to your image, basically. And so, if that would be helpful for whatever you're doing, then it might be fine for that.
Right.
Yeah. So, but I love the moon Jupiter here applying. It's like, here you go, one last time.
Yeah, that is very nice. It's a nice waxing moon. Mercury is direct. Mars is actually separating from the opposition with Uranus at this point.
Yeah.
Really, the only downer is having lost Venus from Sag and now moved into Capricorn, although that's certainly not a deal breaker.
Yeah, and then it, of course, also helps the 11th house a bit more.
Right.
Rather than only having Saturn there, it also does have Venus, even though it's a more toned-down Venus in Capricorn. But, it's still a benefic there in the 11th, joining Saturn. Also, yeah, I do love that the Mars-Uranus is separating by a couple degrees at this point. That's nice compared to the last few. It tones down the volatility a little bit. And one thing I did just notice, even though I've been talking about, the Neptune stationary in the first not being great for details, a possible counterbalancing factor here is that the Mercury-Saturn sextile is actually within a couple degrees now.
Okay.
So that helps a little bit in terms of solidifying, mercurial things.
Yeah. I'm also noticing Venus is applying to a sextile with Mars within 3 degrees. So that's a nice little mini bonification condition, which would help since otherwise Mars is ruling the 2nd house and it's contrary to the sect, although dignified in the 9th, and now separating from Uranus. So that could help balance things out in terms of financial matters or in terms of 9th house matters such as travel or education.
Yeah.
Since those are potential problematic areas for this chart, with Mars ruling the 2nd and placed in the 9th in a day chart, although there's certainly, with that stuff, some major mitigations going on.
Yeah. So I think this is a really nice chart for the end of the month. Possibly the one a few days before on November 23rd, the featured election is a bit more positive, but it is nice if you don't want to worry about Mars-Uranus quite as much with the separating here.
And then after this, we lose Jupiter in Sagittarius basically a week later. And then that's pretty much it for us. We're out of business at that point.
Everything in Capricorn.
We're going to have to figure out how to do electional charts with everything in Capricorn for a year.
God. Yeah, that's going to be harder for sure.
Right. All right. Is that the last election for the month?
That is the last election for the month.
All right. Awesome. Well, that sounds pretty good. So this is one of the better electional months then for the entire year.
It is, which is funny because with Mercury retrograde most of the month, normally people just sort of immediately write that off.
Right.
But there's some really nice things counterbalancing that. And it's so nice that that coincides near the end of the month. All these piled up, like the last week, happens to coincide with Mercury being direct again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for finding those charts this month.
You're welcome.
All right. I guess that's it for this episode of the Auspicious Elections podcast. So thanks everyone for subscribing. Thanks for your support through Patreon. If you have any questions, please just post them in the comments section below this post on Patreon itself. And good luck with your elections this month. And we'll see you again next month for the elections for December. And we're also going to be putting together this month, hopefully, and getting it out sooner than we did last time, an entire year ahead forecast for 2020, where we're going to go through and pick one electional chart out, one of the best electional charts you can find for each of the 12 months of next year. And we'll make that available as a separate little report that you can buy that'll have a video and audio and written version, just like these monthly forecasts do.
Exactly. And that way, if you want to plan further ahead in your year for particular electional moments, that's what that is good for.
Right. Because we picked out one of these charts way back in December, and it's still, now that we're actually there and zeroing in, we can see that it's still the best chart.
Yeah.
And so some people that had bought the report previously had known about this for a long time.
Exactly.
Leading up to it.
Right. So that's great for planning ahead. If you're a subscriber, you'll still get, of course, even without that, 4 to 6 elections per month by subscribing to this.
Right. Cool. All right. Well, that's it for this episode of the Auspicious Selections podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next month.
See you again soon.